In the dim light of the small chapel, dust particles danced like memories caught between flickering candles. David sat alone, the weight of lost years etched into his features. The wooden pew creaked as a shadow slipped in. Lily, with her wide eyes and tangled hair, seemed to emerge from a forgotten dream. She moved closer, a whisper of a smile breaking through her uncertainty. "I see things," she said softly, her voice fragile yet unwavering. David studied her, his heart a tapestry of hope and fear. The confession had come like a storm, unraveling the fabric of his quiet life. He didn't want to believe it. He wanted to hide within the shadows of his grief. But Lily's gaze pierced through, drawing him into a world where dreams twisted into reality and truths long buried threatened to surface. Together they stood on the brink of revelations that could shatter their fragile existence. The soft light of dawn spilled through the dusty windows of the small, weather-beaten church. Shadows flickered, dancing on the wooden pews where David knelt, his heart heavy with the weight of unspent grief. He had long buried his pain under layers of sermons and hymns, but as the echoes of the past intertwined with the morning light, he felt the sharp pang of loss stabbing at him once more. There, in the sanctuary of solitude, he battled the memories of his wife's laughter, the way it used to fill the air with warmth before the silence descended. It was then that the sound of shuffling caught his attention. A figure emerged from the cyclone of swirling dust, a girl, perhaps no older than 8. Her tangled hair was matted and unkempt, her clothes mere rags clinging to her frail body. She stood at the entrance, hesitant, as if the world outside had whispered dark truths that kept her rooted in place. David's breath caught in his throat, a mixture of surprise and protective instinct bubbling within him. How could someone so fragile be left to wander alone? She stepped inside, her hazel eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity, a haunted look that seemed to mirror his own torment. David felt an inexplicable pull toward her, a connection forged from shared desolation. It was as if she carried the weight of unspoken stories, the echo of abandonment, lingering in her every movement. He crouched to meet her gaze, hoping to ignite a flicker of trust, but all he saw were shadows. A veil of sorrow draped over innocence, whispering secrets too painful to voice. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. The girl dipped her head, her curls falling like curtains around her face. In that moment, he noticed the grime beneath her fingernails, the dirt etched into her skin, remnants of a life lived on the fringes where kindness was a scarce commodity. He felt a surge of protectiveness welling within him, an instinct that had long been dormant since he lost his wife, leaving him adrift in an ocean of solitude. A heartbeat passed before she spoke, her voice a mere breath. "I'm not lost. I'm here." David's heart ached at her words, laden with an unyielding determination that belied the fragility of her frame. It struck him that she had fought to arrive in this sanctuary, the weight of her journey worn exquisitely upon her. He wanted to know her story, to understand what had led her here, but he sensed a chasm between them, one that felt insurmountable. He stood, motioning for her to follow him deeper into the church, his heart pounding as he scouted for remnants of warmth amongst the cold, unforgiving pews. Each step felt heavy, as if she carried the burden of countless unspoken traumas. The more he tried to bridge the gap, the more he found himself retreating into an emotional fortress. David had trained himself to preach hope, yet he felt engulfed in a darkness that threatened to consume him whole. As they reached a simple wooden table, he gestured for her to sit. The girl's eyes flickered around the room, taking in the empty sanctuary bursting with echoing silence. David felt the weight of his own grief pressing down as he prepared to share his small piece of a broken world. He opened his mouth to speak, to share a semblance of hope, but the words turned to ash on his tongue. Instead, he offered her a slice of bread, a meager offering against the enormity of her hunger, and found himself longing for a connection that felt increasingly out of reach. The girl took the bread, her small fingers trembling as she broke off a piece, but her gaze remained distant, fixed on an unseen horizon. David could almost see her memories flashing behind her eyes, her thoughts drifting to a place he dared not follow. His heart ached with empathy. She was a tapestry of lost moments, each thread woven with sorrow and uncertainty. He realized then that they were both navigating uncharted waters, two souls adrift and haunted, yet sharing the same air. With every passing moment, David felt the emotional distance widening despite the physical closeness. He wanted to reach across that chasm, to draw her into the warmth of a new family, but he knew his heart was still too encumbered with the weight of his own grief. They were two ships, sailing alongside one another, but destined to drift apart, tethered only by the fragile thread of hope that withered beneath the harsh sunlight of reality. Lily stepped out of the cab, her small frame swallowed by the towering trees that surrounded the quiet house. Autumn leaves danced at her feet, swirling in shades of amber and crimson, whispering secrets of change. The air was laced with the scent of damp earth, fresh and unsettling, much like the anticipation that knotted in her stomach. David stood at the threshold, his silhouette framed by the soft light spilling from the window behind him. She couldn't quite place the expression on his face. His lips twisted in a hesitant smile, but his eyes held a storm she yearned to decipher. As she crossed the threshold, the door clicked shut behind her, sealing them in a space heavy with unspoken words. The interior was dim, an array of shadow and light filtering through lace curtains that fluttered gently. The warmth of the house was worlds away from the chill that clung to her skin. David moved past her, gesturing toward a small, cluttered living room that bore hints of life. A slumped armchair, a stack of books teetering precariously on the edge of a coffee table. She caught a glimpse of a frame turned face down on the mantelpiece, the sharp edges of grief carving deeper wounds. "Make yourself at home," David said, his voice a whisper struggling against the weight of the silence. Lily nodded, though the words felt foreign in her throat. She perched on the edge of the armchair, hands folded in her lap, as if fearing the very fabric of her being would unravel in this fragile moment. David moved about the room, his footsteps hesitant, as if he were testing the ground beneath him for cracks. She could sense the tension coiling between them, a tightrope lingering above a chasm of unuttered fears. "So," David began, his gaze darting to the half-open kitchen door as if seeking refuge, "what do you like to do?" The question hung in the air, heavy and awkward, like a forgotten melody. Lily considered the query, her thoughts drifting to the dreams that had led her here, stitching together fragments of a life not entirely her own. "I read a lot," she finally replied. "And sometimes I—" Her voice trailed off, an inexplicable longing curling around the edges of her words. "Sometimes you?" He prodded gently, as if the act of coaxing the truth might ease the tension. She felt the need to share her dreams, the ones that played like films across the backdrop of her mind, but the words slipped away, caught in the web of their shared silence. Instead, she settled for a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. David's brow furrowed, and she could see him retreat into himself, the quiet preacher who had given up on the world, even as he had taken her in. The hours faded into a twilight haze, the sun retreating beyond the horizon, leaving behind a chill that seeped through the windows. Lily moved to the small kitchen to help prepare dinner, hoping the mundane task would knit some semblance of normalcy between them. David watched her from the doorway, hands shoved deep in his pockets, uncertainty etched on his features. She could feel his gaze tracing her movements, searching for something he wasn't quite ready to name. As she sliced the vegetables, the knife meeting the cutting board with a soft thud, a fleeting image flickered in her mind, a memory of a woman with warm eyes, smiling in the glow of flickering candlelight. She flinched, the memory piercing through her, echoing David's wife like a haunting refrain. The tension thickened, a tightening coil within her, as she fought against the encroaching darkness of the thought. What was she like? The question escaped in a breath, soft yet laden with curious weight. David stiffened, the silence stretching momentarily, tugging at the raw edges of their shared grief. She was everything, he said finally, the words falling from his lips like fragile leaves. He stepped further into the kitchen, the air thick with unshed tears and buried memories. She took care of everything. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really got to know her. The confession hung between them, an invitation to tread carefully on the shards of a shared sorrow they both bore. Lily looked up, her heart aching with the realization of how delicate this moment was. The flickering light from the stove cast shadows across his face, deepening the lines etched by loss. She wanted to reach across the void, to reassure him that they could forge something new, something that wouldn't drown beneath the weight of the past. But as David's gaze found hers, she felt the echoes of that same past whispering secrets she wasn't yet ready to hear. A jumbled tapestry of dreams and confessions that bound them together in ways neither yet understood. The sun cast long shadows across the small living room as David cleaned the dust from the worn-out furniture, the quiet hum of the Saturday afternoon settling around him. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, scribbling furiously in a notebook, her brows furrowed in concentration. Each stroke of her pencil seemed to pull her deeper into a world David could only glimpse through her occasional distant gaze. His heart tightened as he watched her. The innocence in her enthusiasm contrasted sharply with the grief that still clung to him, like a heavy cloak. Every morning, David found himself waking up earlier, compelled to brew a pot of coffee strong enough to cut through the lingering fog of his memories. He prepared breakfast with meticulous care, eager to create a semblance of normalcy. Lily would pad into the kitchen, her untamed hair framing her face like an artist's chaotic strokes. Last week, she had shyly asked for scrambled eggs with cheese, a simple request that had sent his heart spinning. The small pleasures they shared began to carve out new spaces in his heart, yet the void left by his wife's absence felt like an unbridgeable chasm. As the days blurred into weeks, Lily's dreams slipped into conversation, like secrets yearning to be uncovered. Initially, David listened with curiosity, fascinated by the colors and characters that danced behind her eyelids. But as she recounted tales of strange lands and whispered truths, something unsettling simmered beneath the surface. One morning, over coffee, she spoke of a man encased in shadows, his voice echoing with familiarity. David felt a chill run down his spine, a tightness in his chest, as he realized the man was filled with the essence of every regret he had buried. Sometimes, Lily said, her eyes glazed with an otherworldly light, the dreams speak of things we wish we could forget. David's hand trembled slightly as he set his mug down. He had not voiced the turmoil within him, yet it seemed Lily had plucked it from the depths of his silence, mirroring the fears he had tried so hard to conceal. There was something otherworldly about how she spoke, an uncanny ability to dissect the fragments of his heart, and with every confession he felt the swell of something he could not name: fear, vulnerability, connection. Despite his unease, David found himself drawn into Lily's world. She would often lead them on adventurous walks through the woods behind the house, her laughter ringing against the old trees like chimes in the wind. There, amidst the rustling leaves, she would tell him stories that intermingled reality and fantasy. Yet, as the stories grew more vivid, so did the tension within him. He began to wonder if she carried a message meant only for him, one he feared to face. One evening, as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, David found Lily staring out the window. Her face was illuminated by the fading light, and he could see the pain flickering just beneath her calm exterior. "What do you dream of, David?" she asked, her voice a delicate thread weaving through the air. The question echoed in the silence, striking a chord he wasn't prepared to reveal. He felt the weight of his past settle heavily on his chest. "I used to dream of a different life," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "But now, I dream of normalcy." In that moment he felt exposed, a raw nerve exposed to the world. Lily turned to him, a flicker of understanding crossing her features. When she spoke again, her tone shifted, growing serious. Sometimes dreams can force us to confront what we've buried. They remind us of who we are. Her gaze held his, and for an instant, David felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to tremble. With each passing day, David's curiosity morphed into a yearning to know the depths of Lily's dreams and the truths they carried. He noticed how the same themes often recurred: whispers of love, loss, and confessions that clung to the edges of her sleep like shadows beckoning him to listen. Yet every revelation felt like a double-edged sword. She was a mirror reflecting the pain he had hidden, and he couldn't tell if he was ready to embrace what lay before him. As the blend of their lives continued, a storm brewed in the recesses of David's mind. He began to question whether he had welcomed her into their home to heal or to mask the fractures of his own heart. Tension wrapped around them like an invisible tether, binding them in an unspoken dance of grief and hope. The realization that Lily might unlock secrets he wasn't ready to face settled like a stone in his stomach, and each heartbeat echoed with the question, what if her dreams were as much a doorway to his past as they were a glimpse into her future? Lily stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the dim light filtering through the sheer curtains. The rain drummed softly against the glass, creating an intimate cocoon that seemed to draw her further into the depths of her thoughts. She gazed out into the murky world, where droplets cascaded like sorrow itself. Inside, the silence felt oppressive, heavy with the unspoken words that hung in the air between her and David. The warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the chill in her heart. David was in the living room, absently flipping through an old book that had gathered dust on the shelves. He had lost himself in the stories of the past, a distraction from the present that felt increasingly unbearable. Each page turned was a reminder of the life he had built before everything changed, before the dreams that Lily spoke of began to intertwine with the memories of his wife. Her voice echoed in his mind, a haunting melody that stirred the stillness within him. The image of her smile, the confession she had made on her deathbed, now felt like an insurmountable wall between him and Lily. David. Lily's voice broke the silence, tentative yet filled with an urgency that made him look up. He met her gaze, and for a moment the world outside faded away. There was something raw in her eyes, a vulnerability that made his heart clench. Can you tell me about her? About your wife? The question hung in the air, weighted with the ghosts of his past. The longing in her voice mirrored the ache in his chest, and he felt the walls he had built around his grief begin to tremble. He hesitated, unsure if he was ready to let the floodgates open. Why do you want to know? It's been years, and it's in the past, he replied, his tone sharper than he intended. Lily flinched at his words as though he had struck her. She lowered her gaze, the vulnerability in her eyes melting into hurt. Because I'm living in that past, she murmured. I hear her in my dreams. I see things I can't explain, and it feels like you're pushing me away. The air between them thickened, crackling with the unspoken truths waiting to be unveiled. David's heart twisted. He had never meant to push her away. The weight of his sorrow, the betrayal of memories, threatened to consume him. You're not living in her dreams, Lily, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. You're here with me, in this moment. The sincerity in his words sparked a flicker of hope in Lily's eyes, but he could see the confusion still etched on her face. But I'm not her, she whispered, the edge of despair creeping into her voice. You talk to me like I'm your wife, like I can somehow fill that void. No! The exclamation escaped David before he could rein it in. That's not what I meant. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to gather his thoughts, to express the swirling emotions that were trapped within him. Lily, you're a light in this darkness. It's hard to separate things. The confession felt like a release, yet it left him exposed, as bare as the trees outside, stripped of their leaves in the autumn wind. Lily stepped closer, the rain tapping out a rhythmic accompaniment to their growing tension. "I just want to understand. I want to help you heal." Her voice trembled with sincerity, a plea for connection. David met her gaze, feeling the gravity of her words. "But how?" he whispered, the question laced with desperation. "How can I heal when the memories keep coming back uninvited?" They stood facing each other, breathless, the distance they had created dissolving in the warmth of shared vulnerability. "You need to let it out," she urged, her hands reaching out to clasp his. "We can create new memories together, David. I don't want to replace her. I just want to be here for you." A tear slipped down her cheek, glistening like a fallen star. The sight shattered something within him, a fissure in the dam of grief that had held tight for too long. In that moment, he saw the truth in her eyes. She was not a spectre of his past, nor a shadow of his wife. She was Lily, a living, breathing person who was fighting her own battles. As the rain continued its gentle symphony outside, David found himself inching closer, the warmth of her presence drawing him in like a moth to a flame. "I don't know how," he finally admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to let her go." The honesty in his confession hung in the air, heavy yet liberating. In that fragile moment, they stood together, both trembling at the edge of something profound, forged in vulnerability, ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. The sun slipped beneath the horizon, casting warm hues across the small chapel that stood like a watchful sentinel at the edge of town. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten prayers. David lingered, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the lectern, feeling the grooves carved by years of devotion and despair. He inhaled deeply, a habitual search for the comfort that had long since faded from these walls. Outside, the last whispers of light surrendered to twilight, sending shadows creeping into the corners of his heart. Lily stood just beyond the chapel's doors, her silhouette framed against the gathering darkness. She had come to him like a spectre, a girl who spoke only in dreams, wrapping her words around him like a soft haze. The bonds of reality felt thin whenever she spoke, her voice a haunting melody that lingered long after she fell silent. David couldn't help but be drawn into her world, a place where the past intertwined with the present, and where reminders of love and loss danced like flickering candles waiting to be extinguished. With a hesitant step, Lily entered the chapel, her eyes wide and unguarded. They fell on David, who stood still as a statue, lost in thought. The air between them crackled with an unseen tension, a current both electrifying and fragile. She approached slowly, each footfall a reminder of the silence they had shared, the words left unspoken in the sanctuary of grief that resided within them both. "Do you ever hear her?" she asked gently, her voice breaking the stillness. "Sometimes," David replied, looking away, the weight of memories pressing down on him like the heavy wooden beams above. "At night, when the world is quiet." A shiver ran through him, not from the cold, but from the echo of longing that reverberated in the silence of her question. He dared to glance at her, their eyes locking for a heartbeat, a fleeting moment where connection surged between them, pulsing with unexpressed emotions. Lily's gaze softened, and she moved closer, her presence lighting up the dimness that enveloped them. "Do you think she's at peace?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it resounded in the hollow space of his heart. David wanted to believe she was, that the whispers he felt were of love and forgiveness, but truth battled with hope within him. He swallowed hard, grappling with the spectre of regret that haunted his every breath. In that shared silence, something within him shifted. David took a step forward, closing the gap that separated their worlds. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling as they brushed against her skin, soft and warm, as if she were made of sunlight. The simple touch ignited a maze of emotions. a flicker of connection that spoke volumes where words dared not tread. Lily looked up, surprise painted across her delicate features, but her gaze held no fear, only a mirror of the turmoil beating in his chest. "I don't know how to let go," he admitted, gripping her hand a little tighter, as if she alone could anchor him in this storm of sorrow. Their hands intertwined, a gesture that felt both sacred and forbidden, binding them in a promise of understanding. The world outside faded away, leaving them cocooned in this fragile moment, alive with the possibility of healing. She squeezed his hand gently, her touch a lifeline amidst the sea of grief that threatened to pull him under. "Sometimes we don't have to let go to find peace," she replied, her voice steady, a balm for his turbulent spirit. "Maybe we can hold on while still moving forward." Her words wove through his heart like a thread, stitching together the pieces he thought were lost forever. David searched her eyes, seeing not just the innocence of a girl, but a kindred spirit, someone who understood the depths of sorrow, yet dared to speak of hope. As the shadows deepened outside the chapel, David leaned closer, drawn into the orbit of her warmth, feeling the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crumble. "Do you really think it's possible?" he asked, vulnerability threading through his voice. Her gaze held his with an intensity that made the air crackle anew. "I think it's the only way to truly remember," she whispered. And in that moment, David felt the flicker of something he thought lost, the chance to walk forward, hand in hand, with the girl who spoke in dreams. Lily stood in the dim light of the small kitchen, a single bulb swinging above her like a pendulum of doubt. The dishes, stacked in the sink, were a monument to her inner turmoil. She could hear David in the other room, his voice a steady murmur, the kind that could soothe even the most restless heart. It was a voice she had grown accustomed to, a sound that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Yet today, every word felt weighted, carrying the echoes of a truth she had not yet shared. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, the night outside cloaking her in shadows. "You've been given a gift," David often said, his eyes bright with fervor when she spoke of the dreams that came alive in her sleep. But what good was a gift that felt more like a curse? The dreams had taken root, entwining her thoughts, culminating in a confession she knew would shatter the fragile peace they had built together. The truth flickered at the edge of her consciousness, a constant reminder of the darkness she held. As she gripped the edge of the counter, a memory surged through her, a moment of vulnerability shared under the stars. David had shared pieces of his wife, stories that clung to him like sage smoke. She could still see the way his eyes glistened with unshed tears when he mentioned the day she had confessed her most guarded secret. The weight of that past loomed over them, casting a long shadow on their present. Lily had learned to navigate that shadow, tiptoeing around the edges, but it felt as though the darkness was expanding, threatening to engulf them both. "Lily?" David's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle yet probing. "Are you all right?" She could hear the fabric of his worry, woven tightly around the threads of his affection. The tremor in his tone gripped her heart, a reminder of how deeply intertwined their lives had become. How could she burden him with her truth? She knew that once spoken, her words would fracture the trust they had nurtured, transforming their quiet sanctuary into a storm. "Just lost in thought," she managed to reply, her voice barely above a whisper. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. David stepped into the kitchen, his presence radiating warmth, but she could see the shadow of concern etched on his brow. He had a way of noticing the smallest shifts in her demeanor, and that only deepened her internal struggle. How could she unravel the threads of her own heart without tearing his apart in the process? The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. David took a step closer, invading the space she had desperately tried to maintain. "It's okay to talk to me, you know," he said, a softness in his voice that made her stomach twist. "You don't have to hide." But how could she explain the dream that had clawed its way into her thoughts, the one where his wife's final confession played out like a haunting refrain in her mind? It felt like a betrayal to even entertain the thought, yet here it was, pulsating beneath her skin. In that moment, the weight of her secret became unbearable, a suffocating silence that filled the air between them. The walls around her heart trembled, and she could feel the fissures expanding. "David," she breathed, her voice breaking as she took a step back, the distance unwittingly echoing the fracture she felt inside. "I need to tell you something." The words tumbled out, a fragile plea for understanding wrapped in fear. His eyes widened slightly, the warmth from earlier flickering as he braced himself for the impending storm. "What is it, Lily?" That simple question signaled her heart to race, her pulse drumming loudly in her ears. She could see the concern morphing into something deeper, a mixture of hope and fear reflected in his gaze. It was then that she realized she was standing on the edge of a precipice. If she took the leap now, there would be no turning back. "The dreams," she began, her voice faltering, "they're about your wife. I hear her final confession in them, and it feels so real." The silence that followed was palpable, each word hanging in the air like an unsheathed sword. She had crossed the line, stepping into the realm of vulnerability, and the crackling tension between them ignited. David's expression shifted, the warmth fading as he processed her revelation. They stood there, two souls on a collision course, poised between understanding and the chaos that could follow. Lily stood by the peeling window, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dilapidated room. Outside, the wind whispered secrets among the trees, but inside, a heavy silence enveloped her. David sat on the edge of the worn armchair, his hands clasped tightly together, a storm brewing behind his eyes. He could feel the weight of her gaze, brimming with the unspoken words that had danced between them for weeks. This was it. The quiet moments had led to this crescendo, the confession that lingered just beyond her lips. "Do you remember the night I came here?" Lily's voice trembled, breaking the stillness like glass, shattering against the floor. David nodded, heart in his throat, the memory sharp and vivid. He could still see the fear in her eyes, the shadows of her past trailing behind her like ghosts. In that moment, she had been lost, seeking refuge in his home. And he, the quiet preacher, had taken her in, believing he could provide safety and solace. But now, as she stood before him, everything he thought he understood shifted dangerously beneath his feet. "I was never just a girl who spoke in dreams," she continued, her voice gathering strength. "My dreams were whispers of truth, David. And one night, I dreamt of your wife." The air thickened, and David recoiled as memories of her flooded back. The warmth of her laughter, the way her fingers danced across the piano keys, and the moment she had confessed her darkest fears to him. He felt the betrayal twisting in his gut, yet curiosity clawed at him. "What did she say?" he managed to ask, his voice a mere whisper, raw and tentative. Lily took a step closer, her eyes fierce yet vulnerable, reflecting the pain she carried. "She loved you, but she was afraid. Afraid of the darkness within and the secrets she couldn't share. On her last night, she told me about the choices that haunted her, about the man who came to her in dreams, a shadow of regret." With each word, David felt the fabric of his reality unraveling. The air was thick with grief, tinged with betrayal, and he could almost hear the echoes of his wife's tortured voice. "She spoke of a baby, David," Lily pressed on, her breath hitching as she revealed the truth hiding behind her dreams. "A baby she lost, one she had never forgiven herself for. She told me she was afraid you would never know, that you would always wonder why she seemed so distant, so haunted." The room closed in around him, and every breath felt like a weight. His heart raced as the realization hit him. This confession was the key to the door he had locked away in his heart, filled with the pain of unanswered questions. David's world tilted. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor, shattering the quiet that had cocooned them. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice shaking, a tempest unleashed. "Why allow this to linger, to haunt us both?" But Lily was steadfast, her gaze unwavering. "Because I didn't know how. I was afraid of losing you, like she lost everything. But the truth has a way of clawing its way free, and I couldn't let her pain be carried alone any longer." Emotions cascaded like a waterfall, overwhelming him. Memories rushed back, the moments he had shared with Lily, the laughter, the long nights filled with dreams and whispered secrets. Were they all tainted by shadows of a past he had been so blind to see? Stricken, he felt everything he had held dear start to blur, and for a moment he couldn't breathe, caught between the love for his wife and the connection he had forged with this girl who spoke in dreams. "Lily," he said softly, the storm inside him quieting to a mere whisper. "You carried her truth for so long, and in doing so you became a part of her story. But we can't live in the shadows of what was. We have to find our own way forward." The weight of his words hung there, suspended in the air, as the realization of his own heart began to settle like dust. He could forgive the darkness of the past, but he had to face the light of the present. In that pivotal moment, the air shifted, and Lily took a breath that felt like a rebirth. "I want to help you heal, to uncover the truth together," she said, her voice gentle yet resolute. It was an invitation, not just to find closure for his wife's tormented soul, but to build something new, a bridge across the chasm of loss. David took a step toward her, the distance between them evaporating. The storm had passed, and what lay ahead was a tentative hope, shimmering like the sun breaking through the clouds, beckoning them both toward a new beginning. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the meadow, where wildflowers swayed gently, whispering secrets only the breeze could decipher. Lily stood beneath the ancient oak, its gnarled branches reaching out like a protective embrace. David circled her, heart heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, their shared silence thick with memories unraveling like threads of a fraying tapestry. As the wind rustled the leaves, she closed her eyes, surrendering to the symphony of nature. The distant chirping of crickets began to weave their own tapestry of sound, a soft reminder that life continued, even in loss. David knelt, brushing his fingertips across the earth, tracing the impression of a delicate flower blooming defiantly amid the grass. Lily opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. In that moment, the air crackled, and the world around them held its breath. She stepped closer, the soft touch of her hand on his shoulder anchoring him to the present. No words were needed. Their hearts echoed in the silence. Together they breathed in the scent of the damp earth, a promise of renewal, as the last rays of sun slipped beneath the horizon, ushering in the night, a quiet testament to both grief and healing.